Like many of you, I've been thinking about the big tech layoffs that have happened over the last few weeks. When you think about Google, who has laid off 12,000 people, something like 5% of the workforce, and this total bill being something like 2.5% of the cash that they generate each year. I've been thinking about whether or not these kind of layoffs can be considered reasonable or the right thing strategically in the long term. Of course, recessions happen, and when recessions happen, companies have to adjust their cost bases if the alternative is financial distress and an environment where even more jobs are lost. And that makes sense. That's a terrible part of any recession, but it happens and it's the reality. Then you have these really fantastic businesses such as Microsoft, such as Google, who even in recession are going to still see pretty strong profit and cash flow generation. And for these businesses, which are always going to be okay, when they go into layoffs, you've got to think about the short-term reasons versus the long-term reasons. Let's take a company like Google who, let's be honest, is going to do very well in any given year. Okay, they're probably going to make less money than they did last year, but they're still going to make a lot of it. Is it simply the fact that over the last 3 years, they've just got very lax at performance management, i.e. we've been hiring so many people, and because the times are great, we've taken a lot of people that probably shouldn't have been at Google, but we didn't performance manage because we didn't want to? Or is it simply the fact that it's a box-ticking exercise whereby the shareholders demand a level of fiscal prudence and management of the earnings per share to a high a level as possible so they look good at the end of this year? The reality, as all reality is always somewhere in the middle. But speaking to people who I know who work at Google and listening to the stories of those people, their friends, and the people that they know that have been let go, it does seem to appear, and of course this is absolutely anecdotal, that it's more of a box-ticking exercise and less of a performance management exercise, or we just didn't performance manage in the last 3 years. And this creates this short-term versus long-term strategic piece of thought because, of course, empowered staff create productivity. If you don't have an empowered staff base, you are not going to get this huge push to the mission, to the vision of your business. Of course, when you go through layoffs, and this is going to be common for most companies, they're either unavoidable or avoidable. Layoffs are quite bad for culture, but if they're coming from a place whereby the business actually may not survive if they don't do that, they're understandable. However, if you are like a Google where you say, we're going to make a ton of money, just a bit less than last year, and we've decided also that we want to make sure our earnings per share are as high as they possibly can, so we're going to gut 5% of the workforce, that's a tougher thing to sell to employee base who you are trying to empower, because they're going to think, who matters more? And of course, it's fine and reasonable to know that a shareholder does have certain rights, but when profit is the outcome in any situation, I suppose you've got to think about what's the right thing to do. Now, of course, there are going to be people that have not much to do this year. If Google are pausing their hiring, then Google's talent team are going to have not much to do. The short-term profit maximizer would say, well, if they're not doing anything, exit those people, and when we need to hire again, we'll rehire other people. Of course, it sounds ridiculous when you talk about it like that, because, as we discussed earlier, empowered teams make productive teams. And the long-term value of having empowered people at your company is far greater than the short-term implications of saving a few points on your cash flow expense. The question I'm thinking about, and honestly I don't know the answer, but I'd love to hear your views, is what is the basis for these big tech layoffs? Is it simply a case that they just did not lay off anyone for many years and now they're turning to performance management? Or is this simply a box-ticking exercise to ensure that the earnings per share is as protected as possible? The second point to that is, if you're a shareholder, would you rather have earnings per share maintained this year at the expense of the total or the remainder of the employees being less motivated, being less empowered? And the impact that might have not only on this year's earnings per share, but next year's, the year after's, and the terminal value.